In this video, you're going to learn how Workbench cut monthly unbilled fees by 75% by switching from BQE Core to Monograph. New to Monograph? It's an easy-to-use project management software designed exclusively for A&E firms. Click the link in the show notes below or scan this QR code with your phone to get started. Today, we're talking with Workbench out of Santa Cruz and Oakland. They're a concept-to-completion building studio with 30 on staff. They switched from BQE Core and Smartsheets to Monograph. Monograph streamlined their billing, their budget transparency, and their forecasting. We've got Jamileh Cannon here. She's the founding principal at Workbench. Jamileh, what made you start your business? And what was a breakthrough moment when you realized the business was really starting to work?
Yeah, so I think any business owner and probably parent would also say like naivete. We just thought, yeah, sure, we could do this. And then you get in to start doing it, you're like, oh man, this is hard. This is really hard. No, in more seriousness, I had worked for a large general contractor and was kind of done, didn't really want to live up in San Francisco anymore and was kind of done with that big, heavy grind of a job. And my partner and I wanted to change paces a little bit. And so he and I decided to move to Santa Cruz. And we felt like we had enough experience to start something. We weren't totally sure what that was. So we consulted for a while for other folks and then eventually put together this idea of what Workbench would be. And, I got really tired on the GC side of always arguing with architects and arguing with the owner. And it just felt like the whole industry is set up to be like a battlefield. And we really wanted to figure out, could we just do this in-house and not have it feel so contentious all the time? So that was kind of the impetus for starting Workbench. And shortly after we formally became Workbench, we were able to find some investment partners and buy a piece of property, which is the finished product we just completed this winter. And it's 15 townhomes in SoCal, California, which is a little town just a few miles south of Santa Cruz. Yeah, so that was the very beginning. Every year, I think the business is starting to work. And then the next year, I'm like, no, we're really getting it now. Now we've really got it. So I think it evolves every year. But when we didn't have to struggle so much with cash all the time, or we didn't have to struggle so much with are we going to make payroll this month? And it's been quite a few years since we've had to do that. So that was probably the turning point when I really felt like there was some security in what we were doing.
Do you remember not only getting cash flow positive, but seeing like more and more months in cash available to cover payroll?
Yeah, and then also knowing that there was enough pipeline of work. Like we could get to the point where we could see a pipeline of work, or we could stress out a little bit knowing that work wasn't coming, and then we could go get it instead of just always being reactionary to it. So that those were definitely big turning points in the business.
Before Monograph, Workbench faced inefficiencies in using a bunch of different disjointed systems. So BQE Core, Microsoft Projects, Excel, and Smartsheets. But now after Monograph, Workbench has improved its revenue forecasting, its budget management. There's fewer projects going over budget due to unforeseen changes and ad service requests. A little bit more about Jamileh. Jamileh Cannon, she's both the founding partner and principal architect, licensed California architect, seasoned construction manager. She's directed over $150 million worth of multifamily construction, even prior to Workbench. She is a aficionado of spreadsheets. I really love that. I mean, honestly, you kind of have to be as an architect with all the schedules, and not just operation schedules, but project schedules. She's a passionate believer in the power of community and a strong proponent of great user-centered design. So great alignment with Monograph. Jamileh is also well-versed in leading teams and managing the many moving parts and personalities of a project. So let's talk a little bit about Workbench from your perspectives, Jamileh. So Workbench is more than an architecture firm. It's even more than a design build firm. So talk us through the business model and also what attracts certain kinds of design talent to come work at Workbench.
Yeah, so we have three teams in-house. We have a development team, a design team, and a construction team, and they all fluctuate a little bit in terms of busyness or insanity to kind of being a little slow, and the work ebbs and flows through there a bit. But we have Tim, my partner Tim, and Sibley. I have two business partners. They really, really run the development side of stuff. We do a lot of market rate development. We also have a We have an investment fund through a nonprofit that Sibley started that's totally separate entity from Workbench, but we raise money through that into that fund to help fund higher impact, more affordable housing projects. So that's really exciting business model. That's a whole separate conversation about how that is all structured and how we run money, how the money is raised, and then how those funds get used and what the impact of those funds is. So generally speaking, though, we have we'll invest in projects, we'll invest with land partners, or we'll also do for fee work for small scale developers or people. There's a lot of properties in Santa Cruz that are, you can fit somewhere between 20 and 150 units on them based on all of the state density bills that have been passed recently. And there's landowners who just don't know how to develop that kind of a property. So they'll come to us because we have a lot of local expertise in how to put the state law and the local zoning code to best use on their property. And then our team will do the in-house architecture on that and the construction on those projects. So in the last 2 years or so, we've really moved into that larger, over 100 unit size project. A lot of the stuff that's built and finished on our website is stuff that we started when we were smaller or getting our feet wet. So you'll see stuff on there that's, ADUs all the way to 15 to 20 unit infill housing projects. And I think, in terms of what attracts people to work with Workbench, I think it's a really different business model. So it's really exciting. There's a lot of stuff happening. And I know for me, and I think this resonates with a lot of architects, is you kind of always want to be your own client, and you want to be able to do the kind of work that you're really excited about doing, and just have less kind of noise out there from the client. And so you have that opportunity at Workbench.
So maybe tell us about the team.
Yeah.
The folks on the team.
The team is a really diverse, amazing group of people. I'm really proud that we have a lot of women on our team. We have we have a high percentage of, we meet a high percentage of diversity and inclusion. And I'm not going to say any of this correctly. We have all kinds of ethnicities. We have women on our team. We're a racially and ethnically diverse team, which I'm really proud of. We've worked hard to do that. That's very hard to do in this space. Architecture, it's slightly easier. It's really, really difficult to do that in construction and in development. So we have 2 women on the development team. Right now, I only have 1 woman on the construction team. Construction team's a little bit small, but typically it's about 50-50 men and women on the construction team as well. So, and the team they're excited, they're jazzed, they really want to be building housing. And so I think they feel really passionate about the kind of work that we do and what the positive impact that work has on our community.
Very cool. So you have your different functions like architecture, construction, development, and then you have these other business side roles. Can you talk about how you sort of have orchestrated that?
Yeah. So Alyssa Willett, she's second in on the bottom row. She heads our finance and operations team. Really finance and focused work. I do a lot of the operations still. Elise works under Alyssa and really helps us. She helps do a lot of the stuff like, let's get our utilization rate up to where we want it to be. How are we using Monograph to improve transparency and to look at our KPIs and to really understand the data and understand our numbers? And so Elise is doing a lot of that kind of interface between the finance team and the operations team. And she also sets up every project in Monograph. She and I meet once a month to go through the project schedules, update things, shift them around, do whatever we need to do to the staffing. So she's really integral in all of that kind of planning for the company. And then most of the admin, HR, accounting, all of that is housed under Alyssa's department. And right now that's a team of 3.5, I'll say.
And then you have a sort of squadron of project architects.
Yeah, we have really only a couple people that operate at like a job captain level, and even some of them can really flex up to a project manager level depending on what size the project is. And then we have 4 or 5 folks, I think, that are really project manager, project architect level work. And I have a creative design director who oversees the whole studio on the design side.
When folks get to about 10 people, maybe it's time to hire a like non-billable staff member. Do you remember a moment in your journey where you kind of went through that? What was your thinking and how'd you kind of reason through getting to that person?
It was just like we're drowning. Like that, like I cannot continue to sustain. And I think for us, it was around 8 people or so. And also knowing, we were at that time still running 2 businesses, so we had one development project going, we were running an architecture team and a construction team. And so it's a lot of changing hats and changing, what you're thinking about is constantly changing, which is true of any business owner, but like you're really kind of shifting gears there. So it was sort of just like a kind of like, we have to do this moment. We can't go on any longer without some administrative help, some office management help. And then it always takes a little while to find the right person. And that was probably 2 or 3 years in. It was definitely pre-pandemic. So it was before 2020.
What was the biggest thing that you were able to take off your plate when that person came in?
Oh, actually, it was even before that. We hired bookkeeping help was the first non-billable position we hired. So all the billing, all of the client invoicing, all of that stuff just took off my plate. That was huge. That was amazing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we hired her probably when we were about 8 people.
Okay, well, let's talk a bit more high level. So what we've noticed with many firms that we work with at Monograph is that they are guided by some ethos or North Star. In fact, like Teresa Talander, who's another design build firm, they have really big North Stars for transparency, collaboration, and communication. Another firm out in Spokane, Washington, their 2 ethos words that they use all the time are anticipate and communicate. And you can imagine how that gets translated down to every staff member. So could you talk a little bit about what those are for Workbench?
Yeah, it was timely that you asked this question because we just did a values exercise and kind of re-looked at what our values were. We feel we really, really, really strongly are an advocacy and policy firm. So we do a part of the development team work is to do a lot of advocating and pushing policy for more incentivizing development and removing the barriers to disincentivizing development work. So a lot of like work with Cal YIMBY, a lot of work locally there's a lot of pushback in Santa Cruz to bigger buildings and density and more housing. So we do a lot of local advocacy work to promote housing policy. And then even kind of smaller stuff just in terms of like, this is not small, but who we hire and the kind of makeup of our team. Like we are advocating for what we believe is just and right in all of the kind of work that we are doing. So that's a really big one. We hold a growth mindset. We are still a young and scrappy team. So, we like to say that we're building the plane as we're flying it, which I think lots of small businesses are doing. And so everybody on the team really does have that growth mindset. We tell people when we interview, like, if you want every process in place and you want things to run perfect and you want to know exactly what you're doing every day and that there's a way to do it and there's an SOP written, do not take this job. This is not the firm for you. So you need to be able to like have some grit, get in there and help us build the plane. And then really prioritizing the health and well-being of our team. It's, we live in Santa Cruz. It is a beautiful place to live. And we really feel like part of the impetus for starting the company was not working 60 or 70-hour weeks anymore and trying to have a better work-life balance. So we try really hard to make sure that the team is also doing that and that we haven't created schedules where deadlines are stacked and people are working crazy hours. And it happens from time to time, but it's definitely a very different culture than a kind of standard larger architecture engineering firm.
Let's talk a little bit more about the business situation that you found yourselves in as you're building the plane, as you were flying it, that was leading into the change to Monograph. So what were those like really big challenges that you were running into?
This is just true of probably lots of architects too, is that architects are architects. Like project management, schedules, like that kind of stuff is not as inherent. It's not an inherent skill that a lot of us have. We have to really learn that and dial that in. And there's more or less resistance to that skill, depending on who you are. And so it was really hard to, we really wanted to empower the team to understand their project budgets and to stay on track with them, especially because we wouldn't necessarily have big teams. Like there are sometimes where a team would be 1.5 people would be working on the project. So that project manager really needed to understand every week where they were with that budget, especially on smaller projects. And so just having a visual clarity, very easy to find about how much money had been spent and how much money is left was so incredibly challenging in other softwares for some reason. And then staffing and project scheduling is really, really huge. It's always a challenge. Like, we're still in Monograph every week, moving stuff around, but it's so easy to move it around and adjust it as it needs to. It's really, really, really simple to do that in Monograph. Whereas I was using Smartsheet before, or a Microsoft project, or some combination of the two, and I couldn't figure it. It was really clunky to try to do it in Core. So really being able to tell the team, like, hey, next week, this is what you're going to be working on. And for me to be able to look forward and say, in 3 months, I need more work, or next week, I need more work. What am I going to do? How am I going to backfill that so my team is busy? And then the billing and invoicing, every time we make a major change on the billing invoicing side of things, it gets easier. And Monograph has been a huge improvement to that side of the business.
I want to talk about this
Oh
example
God.
of the world. And I swear every single architect has to deal with this, and they always come up with a pretty fascinating solution. If you remember from architecture school, I remember there was kind of a ritual to destroy your models. I feel like that's kind of the ritual that's needed here for these staffing worksheets. But what are we looking at here? And so what's wrong with this?
So it's all analog, right? It's not smart. Even though it's in Smartsheets, it's not smart. And there's no easy way to shift it, so it's just not as user friendly. It's probably really on the back end, the same data that Monograph is using. It's just not as easy to use. It took so much time and energy to manage this and keep this updated. It wasn't something that I would go in and just shift for a week, at the end of every week and look at what was happening next week. I would do it once a month and kind of hope it was right for the next few quarter, or for the next 3 months. Could it get this through the end of the quarter? And then on the scheduling side, so the one on the top right was a overall project schedule. The one on the bigger one underneath is the staffing sheet. And the schedules are, again, still also they're just not tied to anything. So I couldn't link them to an overall project schedule. If somebody changed something, but they didn't change it in the master sheet, it's not updating. It's not giving me real data about what's happening on the projects. And I was relieved Chris sent us a couple of examples that they looked kind of like my sheets also. That made me feel good.
Yeah. So what was the conversation that led you to this? What made you start looking? How'd you hear about it? What outstanding questions that you have that made you kind of, I don't know if we should do this, or was it just so easy to just move forward?
It was so easy. I think I told you this when we were talking initially, that we had spoken with Monograph a couple, when we switched to Core, and the thing that hadn't been developed quite yet was the scheduling piece of it. So, and that piece felt really, really important to me. And so we didn't make the jump at that point in time. And then when I was again, so fed up with Smartsheets and trying to do all this stuff analog, it's let's dive back in and see where Monograph's at with their development. And at that point, the entire scheduling module had been built out and was much smarter than it had been before. And the staffing piece of it was really, really sophisticated. Whereas previously, I think it had been more focused on the budgets and the hours tracking and less on the staffing. So just seeing that staffing component had come online was huge. That was all I needed to see to make the switch.
Very cool. So here we are after some time using Monograph, and things have changed. So talk through what was happening before, metrically, quantitatively. Business involves a lot of numbers, and somehow sometimes architects struggle to measure what's going on in the business. Architects don't struggle whatsoever to measure their buildings and dimension their buildings and understand what's going on in their buildings. So we're just kind of trying to make that more visual so that it's easy to do that too for your business. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what those numbers were in the past and what's changed since.
Yeah. Yeah. So, um, we put, Elise helped me put these together, just kind of high level. We think, about 20% of unbilled fees happened every month from just overages. So we went over on the project budget and we felt like we hadn't told the client, or we had told the client specifically it wouldn't take that long. So we didn't feel like we could recoup that money. So about a 20%-ish unbillable rate every month. Now we're down to a 75% reduction in monthly unbilled fees due to just increased transparency and efficiency. So I think really we have like 5% or less of unbilled fees at this point in time. Just because of that, what I was talking about before, project managers can go in, they can look at where they are in the budget, they can call the client and say, hey, I need more money for this phase, or we need to do an ad service because you increased the scope, whatever it is, there's just a lot more transparency. Or, hey, we're just going to move this piece of it into the next scope, or we're not going to do this piece of the work because we don't really need to. It's not in our contract. It would have been a nice extra, but we don't have money. We're not going to do it. So that piece is so much more clear. It used to take me at least, I put 1 to 2 days a month in here adjusting the project schedules and staffing in Excel. I mean, it felt like it took a week, and it's probably because I could only do a little bit of it. It's hard as the business owner to have extended periods of uninterrupted time. And so I'd probably do like a couple hours here, and then I do an hour here, and then I do 30 minutes here, and it'd be just really so much heartburn around that process. Elise and I meet for 1 to 2 hours a month now to update this. And the team is really busy now. So we actually just talked yesterday about, I'm going to go in on Fridays and just double check what the following week looks like to make sure that the projects are staffing correctly and people really are not over allocated. So it'll probably take me 30 minutes on a Friday to just double check that the next week is outlined and looks good. So that is just huge. I can schedule one really delightful, easy meeting with Elise, who I enjoy hanging out with, and once a month, and more or less our stuff is right. And then we spent 20 to 25 hours a month on billing in the past, and we're 4 to 5 times faster than that now. Elise says she spends about 5 hours a month on the Monograph piece of the billing. It goes to accounting, it goes out in QuickBooks. It's super easy.
Folks tell us all the time that they think that they're hitting budgets in a much smarter way now with Monograph because of that transparency and that efficiency. But sometimes they struggle to identify metrically what was that. Often we actually hear from firms, we just didn't even know how to do this in the before. So you're kind of starting from zero and then moving to yes. But this is maybe something for folks to think about who are using Monograph and are seeing projects hit budgets better nowadays. To maybe go look back at those unbilled fees that are remaining month to month compared to the value of logged time. So really cool proof point there. And then Teresa, has similar kinds of benefits to the staffing process going way down, long-term scheduling. And then the billings, the way that she talked about is billings get out the door faster. And then another firm, Garrison, who we also recently featured, they're also seeing faster time to payment on their AR. So let's go more into detail about like what this looks like, where you spend your time or where the team spends your time. How are you using Monograph, and what are your top 3 favorite features?
Yeah, so the team's really using the staffing tool. So the weekly staffing, we're checking on that. We have a Monday morning staffing meeting that that weekly staffing one right there. So they're using that as every week checking in on that. I think, Chris, if you go back to maybe it was the previous one, they're also using the project overview and then the project dashboard. So those really using the project dashboard as hey, what do I have left on the budget? How am I doing? Do I need to adjust who's working on the project for the next couple of weeks? So the team, I think, is using those 2 a lot. Elise and I are using the project planner So we're in there. That's the once a month meeting that we have. We just go through the project overview. We go down project by project. Anything that looks like, hey, the schedule is getting pushed back for funding reasons, or she'll have the project planner open on one screen. I'll have the team forecast open on the other screen, and I'll be looking at who's allocated. That team forecasting one in the middle. So I'll have that open, looking at the next 2 to 3 month time frame, and she'll have the project planner open. I'll be like, oh, we got to switch something here. Jonathan's too busy. Let's put a different job captain with that project. So we're kind of, as we're going through the projects, updating those both, in tandem with each other. So that we do once a month. I'll probably start checking on that weekly staffing report every Friday. So I'll just be looking ahead, what's happening on Friday. Did I forget to push out a schedule, or a project didn't start that we thought it was going to start and I just forgot to update it? So I'll just be kind of cleaning that up and making sure that I'm doing that correctly. Elise is using a ton of the revenue forecasting in our KPIs. So she does a monthly report of what we have contracted and what we have projected on the books. And that's been really helpful just to see what we need from a sales standpoint or a hiring standpoint. So I'm not looking at that in Monograph. She's looking at that in Monograph and then exporting it to a sheet that's got a bunch of other data on it for us. And then what else? Invoice filter. Elise is doing a lot of this stuff. So she is using these tools all the time. And like I said, she said, it takes 4 to 5 hours to send out 30 invoices.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about how this kind of data informs your future planning.
Yeah, absolutely. So we also have kind of a historical data spreadsheet that's running, and it's okay we're doing 100-unit apartment building. These are the 3 projects we've done in the last 2 years that are like that project. How much time did we spend in each phase? And so we're pulling all that data from Monograph. If I'm just doing like a quick feasibility study, I might go in and look at the last 2 or 3 projects that we did. And we do a lot of those. So it'd be, okay, what this project, the team was these 2 people and it took this amount of time. So it takes me 10 minutes maybe to like do the recon, to look at 3 or 4 projects and get an idea of what I should be charging in order to make money on any number of size work.
It's showing you your planned, you're logged, you're unbilled, you're paid, what's open past due, and you can even see it by consultant. So this is a place where project managers will go to see where they stand on a project, or, for example, Teresa Talander's example, this is a place where the director will go to see where invoicing is. For the spreadsheet folks, you can still get a taste of the spreadsheet back in Monograph without you having to manipulate all the formulas. I saw that there was a Q&A that popped up. Hey, Teresa, do you want to actually come up and ask the question?
Hey, how are you doing?
Good.
This is super interesting. Of course. Thanks for the reminder that this is happening. Yeah, I was just curious. So we use Monograph really primarily for the design side of our business. We don't use it at all for the construction side, just because it's a different animal. We use Procore there, and I was curious as to whether you find the same thing, or whether you're approaching that integration in a different way.
Yeah, so probably kind of similar to you guys, Teresa, but so Procore, we run all of our construction projects with Procore, and we do all of our project scheduling in Microsoft Project for construction projects. We actually are using Teams to do our project scheduling for, Teams has a plugin, the online version of Project that just plugs into everybody's dashboard. So for the design team, we're using Teams because it's just not as many activities, and it's just not as critical to have to manipulate it the way that you have to do a construction schedule. And then in an ideal world, my project managers are making sure that whatever they plugged in Teams are the same durations that are in Monograph. So when we initially put our overall, schematic design is from X date to X date, that should match the overall durations that we have in Teams. We're just not building out all of the individual steps in the Monograph schedule. But what we are using Monograph for, which has been huge, and I'd be curious if you guys do this too, is we're plugging in our staffing for the construction team into Monograph, and we're plugging in the overall revenue from the construction team into Monograph. So if the construction team's making, we're not plugging all the flow through in, but we're just plugging, okay, we're making 5% GC fee or 10 or whatever it is on this project. That way we can really forecast, we can do all of our revenue forecasting and our hiring staffing in one spot.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, we are not doing that. So you're saying, when you say construction staffing, you're assigning a construction project manager to project A, whatever, right? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then that just, especially right now, like we're in a little bit of lull. We just finished that 15-unit project. All of our big projects are starting next year. So we're sort of doing a bunch of smaller infill stuff to keep the construction team busy over the next 6 months or so. And they're also doing like a ton of estimating for some of those big projects that are happening. So just in order to make sure, like, A, I'm not making them totally crazy, and B, I've got enough to do that they're like financially they're covered. We're using Monograph staffing tool for that. And it's been really, really helpful.
Oh, that's a great tip. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Teresa. Jamileh, you're also doing your development revenue forecasting. Is that right?
Yeah. So we make a development fees. All three of these businesses make money in a different way, which is, just another joy of running 3 businesses in one company. But development fee is often done with development is usually like a percentage fee of the total cost of the project, and often paid out like at milestones of the project. So we'll go a year without a dollar coming in for the development team, and then we might make a 2% fee coming in. And so really trying to understand, and then all of those are also tied to like starts of construction, which could happen anytime in like a 24-month period. So trying to just forecast as best as possible when that development fee might hit the company so we can have some idea of the revenue. So we'll have it tied, oftentimes it's tied to the construction loan of a project. So that overall project schedules and milestones are in Monograph. At that construction date, there's an activity plugged in for the development team for that development fee coming through.
A lot of architects are interested not only to expand into the design build part, but they're also really interested in development. Where might you point firm owners who are just running architecture services if they wanted to explore that?
That's a great question. I mean, so I do think there's some good resources. There's, architects as developer resources in California. There's, there's companies who have done that work, who've kind of put together schools or like online training courses. I did a ton of listening to the Entree Architect podcast when we started Workbench. It was sort of like a sanity check for me, like, okay, I am not alone in this world that I'm creating. He's got some great interviews with folks that are doing design build work. So that's kind of just a place to like sort of dip your toe in the water and hear some of that language. We started by looking for property. We managed to lock up some property. It took us literally until the last day of our last extension to find a partner for the project. It was so stressful. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that as a place to start, but it worked. And we've spent very little of our own personal money or Workbench money to fund that project. We have a big investment partner on that project. And so you just you do one, you start to learn the language, you do a little bit bigger one, you start to learn that language. And that's been our strategy. I'm not saying that is the best way to go about it. I think you could also do a certificate program in real estate development. You could get connection, you'd have a ton of connections if you did something like that with other people in the real estate development world. We've spoken a lot with other land use consultants in Santa Cruz. So those are also really good relationships because the land use folks also, they're also developing their own projects, and they're kind of in that same game, same mindset, but they're usually at the front end of it instead of the architects and builders who might be in like the kind of middle to back end of it. So developing those relationships and doing, we've done architecture work for land use consultants, and those consultants also have their own projects that they then want us to maybe buy into or work with them in some capacity. So, I mean, I hate to say this on live out there in the interwebs, but we just made it up until it worked. That's like the honest truth.
It's really cool that you were part of the Entree Architect community. We see a ton of folks from there, friends with Mark, because architects who find themselves owning a business, they find themselves learning on the job when they have the business, not when they were an
Right,
employee
you're
on the job.
building the plane while you're flying it, which
Yeah.
is what we're doing every day and have been for the last 8 years.
What are some things, if you hadn't discovered Entree Architect, might you have been going in the wrong direction for years?
Yeah, I think really it's like the mental shift. It's just the kind of mental stamina and wherewithal to like keep grinding and to just say like, I'm going to keep doing this because I'm stubborn or because I think I believe in it, because I know it can work, even if I had to skip my paycheck or I had a really hard month or a really like crappy relationship with a client or, whatever, all the things that go wrong on a daily basis when you own your business or, Tim and I used to go on vacation every summer and inevitably at least one person would quit, if not two or three, like every summer for like 2 or 3 years. Like, okay, who's going to leave this time? There's just like stuff like that where you've kind of got to, I think you just have some thick skin but having that Entree Architect community really was it was really a sanity check. And then it was also really, so there's so many tools in there that, Monograph advertises and is a supporter of Entree Architect community. There's all kinds of just stuff that we might have struggled through for longer had I not been exposed to the tools and tips that other firms like us were using. So, I think in the very beginning, I downloaded all of Mark's, he has a great series of spreadsheets on finances, how to set up your chart of accounts, how to look at the business, like how to read a balance sheet, that kind of stuff. So just, things like that you're trying to teach yourself as you're going.
Yeah, there's a couple things we hear from like every customer. You don't learn about business in architecture school, and that architects are visual learners, And those two things we really try to bring together in Monograph, as you can see, right? Like these things that
It's
used
beautiful.
to look like this.
Yeah, great.
And yeah, you can just look at what it is. Some folks go as far as to say it's almost like you're getting that education just because you can see the relationships. Both you and Teresa have seen what it's like to get into the construction side. That might be a little bit more familiar territory to architects. So was it really just a matter of partnering with the right construction manager?
I cheated. So I went to architecture school. I worked for architects for a few years. Then I said, I'm out of here. I do not like this. And then I worked as a CM, a construction manager, and as a big general contractor. So I did that for a long time. So I was much more familiar with like the industry at the time and what it was like to be on a job site and how to running a big construction project is really like running a business. You're doing all of the same stuff that you do as a business owner. So I felt really like I'd had a little bit of business education, well, a lot of business education, and I knew how to make money. I knew where the risks were. I really knew how to do that on the construction side, less so on the architecture side because it had been a while since I'd been in the architecture world. So when we started, I think we really anticipated that we would have more construction work. Turns out we ended up having tons of architecture work. So we've spent a lot of the kind of early years of the business really building up the tools and processes and the team on the architecture side. And that's actually been, that was an accident, but I think it's been really beneficial because the architecture work feeds the construction work. And the architecture work is so like when the architecture team is in-house and the development team can just say, hey, can you do a test fit for this site? Like how many can I fit? What's the base density? And the design team can just like whip that out the next day in a couple hours instead of it being this like really kind of painful back and forth process with an outside consultant. If you were a developer, right, you'd be outsourcing all of that. So the architecture team is kind of the glue that holds like the whole company together. And a lot of the work really centers around the work that the architecture team is doing. But at the time that we started, I really felt very comfortable in the construction world and knew how to run that kind of a business. So that piece was easy. The architecture piece was hard.
Interesting. I think that you are hiring at Workbench.
We are, yes. I need a project architect who has multifamily experience, preferably also some prefab experience. We have an Oakland office that has a smaller team, and then we also have the Santa Cruz office. And so if there's anybody out there in the Bay Area thinks they'd be a good fit with Workbench, we are definitely hiring a project architect. We're also trying to hire a development director, so someone to really oversee our development team. And I need a part-time marketing consultant to help really push us and take us to the next level. And I probably need a job captain on the architecture team fairly soon. So just those small amount of positions that are super integral to the company.
Yeah. Oh, very cool. I'm really curious what you might say to someone like a firm who is sort of deciding between softwares, between Monograph or BQE. What we'll sometimes see is basically an architect is either deciding between an industry-specific tool like BQE or Deltek Jira versus Monograph, or they're looking at a combination of what we call horizontal tools because they're sort of general purpose, like Asana or Harvest. How would you talk to that person about like what's really at stake and why you would pick Monograph versus one of those other tools?
Yeah, it's funny you ask because we probably have this conversation once every 2 or 3 months in our mastermind, in our Entree Architect mastermind group. So like Monograph is getting a sales pitch every 3 months in that like small circle of people. I think it's really a shortened version of what we talked about today, and really, really, what is your pain point as a business owner and an operations person, right? Because that's what you're doing as a business owner, is you're running the operations of your business. And those pain points are your billing, your transparency of your budgets, and your forecasting. And so, just a condensed version of the conversation we had today, like how easy it is to use this software. And the customer support that you guys have is so phenomenal. So, we call you guys or we chat you, we get an answer back right away. We say, hey, is this feature coming anytime soon? And you're like, yeah, we're working on it. We're planning on rolling it out in the next month or two. Or no, we'll put it on the list, but you're not the only person who's requested it. So I think I have to give you guys a ton of credit. You know the value of that relationship with the customer, and that really shows. And the software is beautiful and it's so easy to use. It's like, I don't even know why anybody would think about using anything else.
Thanks for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button to get the newest videos from Monograph. If you're new to Monograph and exploring if it's a good fit for your AE firm, visit monograph.com or scan this QR code with your phone to get started.